So hello and welcome to yet another episode of Biographics. I'm your interim host, Cal Smallwood. This is my stuffed anteater called Snoot, and today we're talking about Elmer McCurdy, the Wild West outlaw who became a mummy. And all videos on this channel are based on scripts, the script for this one being written by Radu Alexander. Follow them at the social media links below if you are so inclined. Speaking of which, I've also been instructed by my higher-ups behind the scenes who pay my wages to say the words like, comment, subscribe, because fun fact about human psychology and YouTube in general here, me saying that means that people are more likely to do all three. The analytics do not lie about that one, which is weird, right? Because if you like the videos and you want to say stuff about them or you want to see more, you'd like, comment, subscribe, right? But I have to say it anyway. But let's get to it. In the lead up to Christmas of 1976, the cast and crew of the hit television show The $6 Million Man was in Long Beach, California, shooting an episode at the Pike amusement park. One scene involved a shootout in a funhouse between the bionic hero of the show and an evil German spy. The art director, wanting to create an altogether spookier atmosphere for the show, started rearranging some of the props, including an old spray-painted dummy with a noose around its head. For the previous 4 years, the dummy had been hidden away in a dark corner, swinging from the gallows, barely noticed by the carts full of scared passengers that rushed past him. The art director picked up the dummy and one of its arms snapped off. Not surprising really, it was an old and crummy dummy made of brittle wax, except that it wasn't. As the crew member got a closer look at the fallen appendage, he noticed a real human bone surrounded by tissue poking out. The dummy wasn't a dummy at all, but a mummy. This might sound like an urban legend, and it has certainly been passed around as one over the years, but it's absolutely true. The police were called in and the discovery was initially treated as a possible prank. Things only got weirder though as the corpse made its way to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. It had sustained numerous injuries and mistreatments over the years, unsurprisingly, and it had shriveled down to a lean 50 pounds. But the cause of death was likely the copper jacket bullet still lodged in its chest, dating to the early 20th century. After about a week of unusual leads and even more bizarre questions, detectives uncovered the true identity of the body. He was Elmer McCurdy, a turn-of-the-century criminal who got killed in a shootout with the law after robbing a train in 1911. But that still begged the question, how exactly did a Wild West outlaw get mummified and end up as a prop in an amusement park funhouse where a guy pretending to be a robot would shoot an evil Nazi German spy? Well, let's explain that, shall we? If we're being perfectly honest here, the best bits of Elmer's story happened long after he died, but we're going to start from the beginning because that's what we do here at Biographics. And as you will see, he was quite a hilariously inept criminal, more wet bandit than Wild West outlaw, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We don't actually have a lot of information about McCurdy's early life, mainly his military records and whatever scant bits and pieces historians have been able to dig up and cobble together. According to his army documents, Elmer McCurdy was born in Bangor, Maine in 1880. There's a bit of hanky-panky that went on with his birth record because his mother, Sadie McCurdy, was young and unmarried, so to prevent her being ostracized, little Elmer was adopted and raised by Sadie's older brother, George McCurdy, and his wife, Helen. George McCurdy became a doctor but died from tuberculosis or consumption in 1890. Afterwards, Sadie moved in briefly with Helen to help raise Elmer and Helen's own son, Charles. It was only around this time that Elmer found out that his Aunt Sadie was actually his mother, and he took it well at first, with the two of them even moving into an apartment together for a time. However, as he entered the terrible teens, Elmer grew resentful of Sadie for keeping the secret from him. He took to drinking, becoming, and I quote, unruly and rebellious, and in 1895, ran away from home. McCurdy lived with his grandfather for a while, taking a job as an apprentice plumber. It seems he was pretty good at this thing, at least, being described in a later report as, and I quote, skilled tradesman in the plumbing profession. He even moved back in with his mother for a spell, and it started to look like he was on the path to a quiet and happy life. But fate had other plans for Elmer McCurdy. The year 1900 was a rough one for old Elmer. His mother developed a peptic ulcer and died of peritonitis in August. Then, just a month later, his grandfather died of Bright's disease. Not much was keeping young Elmer in Bangor anymore, so he packed up his bags and started wandering the United States, looking to make his fortunes elsewhere. In the next few years, McCurdy drifted from state to state and city to city, plying his trade as a plumber, sometimes as a miner. During this time, he usually went by Frank E. Curtis, possibly because he had gotten in trouble with the law elsewhere in America, America, or possibly because he didn't want to be mistaken for an Irish immigrant who were commonly discriminated against at the time. McCurdy was skilled at his work, but he also descended pretty heavily into alcoholism by this point, so he never really kept a job for all that long. Eventually he decided he needed a change of scenery and spotted an army recruitment ad in the newspaper, so he went down to the recruitment office, and in November 1907, Elmer enlisted in the army. And there's not really much to say about Elmer's time in the military. Probably the most interesting thing, which is somehow fitting given the rest of his life story, is that they misspelled his name in enlistment papers as McCardy instead of McCurdy, and it appeared like that in all of his army records after that. Other than that, Elmer was assigned to Fort Leavenworth with the 13th Infantry, and he learned he could use nitroglycerin to blow the hell up, a skill which he would later put to not very good use during his inept and short-lived criminal career. McCurdy kept his head down and served quietly for 3 years, opting not to re-enlist in 1910 and receiving an honourable discharge. And here's just a bonus fun fact about McCurdy's life. One of his instructors was the future general of the entire army, Douglas MacArthur. Oh man, just name Arthur, cowboy stuff. Anyone else play Red Dead? Just like you get so mad at Dutch. It's like, money. It's like, Arthur, we need more money. It's like, shut up. I'm like, Dutch, shut up. So I'm not sure about anybody else out there, but when I play Red Dead Redemption, I just turn into Tom Hardy's character from The Revenant. And I was like, my pelts. Nothing matters but these pelts. I want these pelts. These are my pelts. After his discharge, McCurdy made his way to St. Joseph, Kansas, where he tried and failed to find a job before spending all of his money on booze. He met up with a friend he made in the army called Walter Chappellery, and you can only speculate on what their intentions were, but they were arrested for carrying around burglar tools, which was a felony in Missouri at the time. Elmer was looking at a few years of prison time, but the jury found him not guilty, and he was once again a free man in January 1911. He and Chappellery parted ways, but McCurdy teamed up with another guy he met on the inside while awaiting trial. He was a hardened criminal named Walter Jarrett, and this time there was no speculation about what their intentions were. On March 24th, 1911, McCurdy and several other men, consisting of Walter Jarrett and his brothers, robbed the Iron Mountain train near Lenape, Oklahoma. Elmer was brought in for his demolitions expertise, a term we're using very loosely here. McCurdy knew how to use nitroglycerin to blow stuff up, sure, but precision was not exactly his strong suit. Elmer used so much nitroglycerin that it blew the safe door clean across the room, through the side of the train car, and inside the safe were around $4,000 in silver coins, which, due to McCurdy's ineptitude, had melted into the safe in the explosion. McCurdy did manage to salvage about $450 worth, and as you might expect, the others weren't happy about it. They got into a fight, and Elmer went his own way, which ended up being kind of a blessing in disguise, because the others were soon arrested for the crime. Right? And even though his first job didn't exactly go, shall we say, swimmingly, McCurdy decided to give the whole crime thing another go. You know, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. You know, blow up more train cars, why the hell not? In September of that same year, he and a couple of accomplices snuck into a bank in, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Chautauqua, Kansas, after hours, hoping to rob it during the night. But good old Elmer didn't learn his lesson and used, once again, way too much nitroglycerin. The explosion this time blew the outer vault clean off its hinges and completely trashed the interior of the bank. But fortunately, in this case, the safe remained intact. Fearing that somebody might have heard, you know, the massive explosion, the gang didn't set off a second charge to open the safe and instead just made off with about $150 in silver coins sitting in a tray beside the safe. So he made a third less money this time, but no. God loves a trier. So once again, not exactly the crime of the century, but he did get away with it, and McCurdy had grand ambitions for his third heist. On October 4th, 1911, 3 outlaws robbed a train that was carrying a fortune of $400,000 in cash as a payment to the Osage Nation. Or at least, that's what they thought it was carrying. In fact, it was transporting sacks of mail, because the robbers, wait for it, got the wrong train. In the end, the criminals made off with about $46 in cash, a wristwatch, a coat, and a few jugs of sipping whiskey. After this frankly astonishing display of criminal acumen, the gang split up and a posse caught up with McCurdy while he was taking a quick power nap in someone's barn after drinking his share of the profits. The posse confronted Elmer and a shootout ensued, and McCurdy was killed. And there are several stories detailing what happened next, but they all end pretty much the same way, with Elmer McCurdy overdosing on bullets. And now, this is the point in most Biographics videos where we, stop because usually when the person dies, that's the end of their story. You know, they usually spend most of their time after that just being dead and just chilling in their grave. But for McCurdy, it's where his story actually starts to get interesting. So usually when you die, you get embalmed, and the person in charge of that in McCurdy's case was a guy called Joseph L. Johnson, who apparently did a pretty good job of filling his body with arsenic-laced embalming fluid to preserve him for a long time. And then he just sat there and waited for someone to claim the body, but then no one ever did, and the body just sat there, getting more and more crusty. And keen to recoup the losses he'd spent embalming the body, Johnson began exhibiting Elmer and charging people to come see him, dubbing him the Embalmed Bandit. And he became quite an attraction, according to some sources, which just go to show back then there wasn't all else to do. After a few years of this, in 1916, two mysterious men finally came in to claim Elmer's body. Supposedly they were distant relatives from California, except a few weeks later, McCurdy was on display yet again at the Patterson Carnival Show. This became Elmer's life. You know what we mean, for the next few decades. In 1922, a guy named Louis Somney acquired Elmer for a wax figure sideshow titled The Museum of Crime, and by that point, McCurdy, who wasn't a very large man to begin with, had completely mummified and shriveled up to the size of a large child. During the 1930s, Elmer made his way into the hands of exploitation movie producer Dwayne Esper, although whether he bought him from Sony or received him as a loan is a matter of who you believe. Either way, the Outlaw mummy eventually made its way back to the Somney family when Dan Somney took over his father's business in the late 40s. He decided to scrap the whole Museum of Crime thing altogether and just put them all in storage, Elmer included. There's no dignity in being the closet mummy, let's be honest. So besides making a quick cameo as a set piece in the 1967 horror movie She Freaks, McCurdy spent the next 2 decades in storage until Somney sold the entire figure collection to Spoony Singh, a guy who owned the Hollywood Wax Museum. And apparently Singh didn't like Elmer because he thought he didn't look, I'm not making this up, real enough, so he sold him to the guy who had his own exhibit on Long Beach Pike. Moving back to McCurdy, we finally circle back to the beginning of our story, which is ironically the end for McCurdy. So by this point, McCurdy had been passed around so much that not only had his identity been lost, but the fact that he was a real actual person wasn't known. They just thought he was literally just a prop or a dummy or a wax figure or something like that. And after a while, Elmer was moved to the funhouse, and that's where he spent his final few years until he was discovered by the crew of the $6 Million Man. In February 1977, Elmer McCurdy's journey came to an end. He was buried in the Summit View Cemetery next to another notorious outlaw named Bill Doolin. Thus, finally, the improbable story of the Wild West mummy came to an ignominious end. So I hope everybody watching at home found this video educational, entertaining, and informative. I certainly found the script all 3 of those things. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like or a comment below with feedback, suggestions for more things for us to cover in the future. Subscribe for more content like this, and as always, go out there and have the day you all deserve.